Okay, so the idea now is to talk a little bit about the lobes of the brain. There are four lobes if you also count the insula, so there are five lobes, but the main ones are the four lobes. We're starting in the front part with the frontal lobe. This lobe is part of the behavior, is part of action taking, movement, because it has the precentral gyrus in it. And after the precentral gyrus, there is the central sulcus, which separates the frontal lobe from the next lobe, which is the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe, which is after the central sulcus, is important for things like sensory and proprioception, as it has the post-central gyrus, which is important for sensory uh, perception. On the sides of the brain, there are the temporal lobes. On each side there is temporal lobe, and the temporal lobes divides from the frontal and parietal lobes by the Sylvian fissure that divides the temporal from the frontal and parietal lobes. The temporal lobe is important for a understanding of a language. For example, it has the Wernicke area. It has the primary auditory cortex, so it's important for hearing. It is also important for memory because it has the hippocampus in it. Now, going more posteriorly, and after the temporal and the parietal lobe, there is the occipital lobe, which is divided from the temporal and the parietal lobe by the parieto-occipital sulcus. And in the occipital lobe, maybe the main part or one of the most known uh, functions of the occipital lobe is the visual part of the occipital lobe. The visual pathway ends on the occipital lobes, and there is where we can see things. This is the final path for the visual pathway. So you can call it the visual part, the visual cortex, the part with the visual cortex. And there is another area which is called the insula. Now its function is not 100% known, and also it is not all consider it at the lobe even, but if you take the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the frontal lobe, and you try to stretch them, you will see inside the insula, which is part again of gray matter, which is like cortex, but it's like the fifth lobe. Okay, so we talked about the lobes of the brain. The frontal lobe, important for behavior, important for movement, important. There is the Broca area there, usually in the left side, in the inferior part. And Broca is important for articulating speech, the motor function of the speech. Again, frontal lobe is important for motor, including speech, behavior, and things like this. Central sulcus, you have after this the parietal lobe, important for sensation, proprioception. It has the postcentral gyrus in it. The temporal lobes, primary auditory cortex, Wernicke area, hippocampus, important for those functions. And in the posterior part, parieto-occipital sulcus, parieto-temporal, parieto-occipital sulcus, or parieto-temporal, parieto-occipital, I think. Parieto-occipital sulcus gives you posteriorly for this, the occipital lobe, which is important for visual. It has the visual cortex. An insula, maybe, maybe not. And this was about the brain, the cortex lobes. Thank you very much, and that's it.